It's where they invented the Chihuahua. This is the No Fear podcast. We know what scares you.
I'm Matt,
And I'm Mel.
and this is the No Fear Cast, the podcast where we dissect horror and all the things that scare us. This is episode 20 of season 6, and we are stalking the waters of our series, The Summers of Sharks. That's right, we all know Jaws, but this summer we're going bigger, toothier, and downright absurd. Forget Sharknado, we have got the weirdest shark horror movies right here all summer. So far, we've faced the sharks of the corn and Sharktopus, and we revisited Jaws. But now we really may need a bigger boat because we dared to watch a movie called Six-Headed Shark Attack.
All right, so I'm going to get us started on this particular episode of our Summer of Sharks. First of all, listeners, I'm sure you noticed from the intro that Lisa's not with us again. She should be returning for our next episode, but you have Matt and I will basically be taking on Six-Headed Shark Attack alone this evening. We survived Sharks of the Corn, so I'm assuming we'll be able to make it through our discussion of Six-Headed Shark Attack. So I'm going to give just a little bit of background about Six-Headed Shark Attack and then give my impressions of the movie such as they are, and then I'll pass it on to you, Matt, for your impressions. Basically, Six-Headed Shark Attack is a 2018 movie. It is in a series of movies. So I think we talked about this on a Patreon episode about the top 10 silliest shark movies ever made, where I can't remember if it was, I think it was Three-Headed Shark Attack was the one on the list. And I had mentioned that I'm pretty sure I watched, if not all of most of Two-Headed Shark Attack. So I'm pretty sure it's two-headed, then three-headed, four-headed, five-headed, six-headed shark attacks. I think that's where they've stopped, but I'm not 100% sure. This would seem like a sci-fi channel movie. It's difficult to find a lot of information about this movie, but I did find an article about it, plot summary slash review on horrornews.net. And the person who wrote this article said that they also thought it could be a sci-fi channel movie. It was not a sci-fi movie per se, but Sci-Fi Channel did show it. I believe they said it was, when because of the Sharknado movies, they would do like marathons of shark movies in the summer, kind of mimicking Discovery Shark Week. And I think that's probably what happened. And I watched whatever I watched of Two-Headed Shark on Sci-Fi Channel. So even if sci-fi was involved in the production of it, these were movies that occasionally would appear on the Sci-Fi Channel. Also, the production company that did this movie and the other multi-headed sharks is Asylum, which listeners, if you are familiar with the Sharknado movies, you know that those are also produced by Asylum. So when I saw that, I kind of felt myself, I was remembering like the connection they have to Sci-Fi Channel. The director of Six-Headed Shark Attack is Mark Atkins. The writers were Mark Atkins and Koichi Pitetsky. And I guess I don't know that we necessarily need to go into the stars of the movie. The main star was, I might massacre this name, I'm not sure, but Brandon Arett, R.A. Not 100% sure how that's pronounced. But he's the main star, probably the most recognizable to people watching. I looked it up and he was in, I believe, District 9 and Chappie. So people who've seen those movies might have seen him. So I guess that's all the background that I will give about the movie, and I will give just some of my impressions of it. Oh, I do want to say just a heads up for something Matt mentioned in the intro. Our last episode was a rerun of our season 2 Jaws app. So even though we're doing the silly sharks this summer, we decided we wanted to take a little bit of a break for the holiday, and so you did get to hear us talk about a serious shark movie with Jaws. And we're not saying by putting Jaws in the mix that these movies like reach its pinnacle of sharkness. But we did want to make sure we included the kind of granddaddy of all these shark movies, shark horror movies. All right, so There was not much rhyme and reason as to why we chose to watch Six-Headed Shark Attack rather than starting at the very beginning. I may be wrong, but I don't think there's a lot of connective plot tissue. I don't even think that they're recurring characters, kind of like the Sharktopus movies. We'll find out, I'm sure, because I think we're going to watch more many-headed shark movies. But this was quite different from Two-Headed Shark, which I had watched. Basically, I think, and Matt, you can correct me when you're giving your impressions. I think the only reason we chose Six-Headed Shark Attack was basically because Two-Headed and Six-Headed are on Prime, and Six-Headed just seems bigger and wackier. And indeed it is. Basically, listeners, if you haven't seen this movie, the Six-Headed Shark Attack is kind of like a weird star-shaped alien ship that just like randomly like goes around in weird circles and loops underwater. It wasn't so much swimming as just kind of weirdly floating up and down and all around in a very ghostly kind of manner. And I was very difficult to, I kind of felt like I was watching like a UFO in the sky, even though it was underwater. So there's kind of like two heads in front that I guess see what's going on. And then there's a couple heads on the side and a couple heads in the back. And in the movie, eventually it gets out of the water. It uses the heads as feet to run around, and it can go pretty fast. The special effects are extremely special, especially the shark. There's some blur in its representation. Definitely has like an older special effects feel, the shark itself. Lots of blood and gore that we talked about missing in Sharks of the Corn. So it's just constant like the shark actually rips its own heads off when they get wounded so it can grow a new one. So there's tons of blood there, and then blood when the people are getting eaten. Six-Headed Shark Attack. My take. I liked the movie. I thought it was a so bad it's funny movie. The idea of a six-headed shark was kind of blowing my mind. I think we joked in the Patreon episode that if it was any more than six, it would just be like a circle of shark heads going around like a saw blade. And I don't know how they could do any more than six. Basically, the premise of it is like a marriage counseling island vacation where you're supposed to do couples challenges to build your bonds, but the guy who's running it's marriage is falling apart, and so basically he is just beset by issue after issue that the movie puts in their way, the main one being the six-headed shark itself, and then all the just bizarre reasons that they end up being vulnerable to it. And I will say this before I pass it to you, Matt. There's a whole page of my notes. Well, I would say half a page of my notes where I just wrote down things with question marks because I didn't understand what was happening. Like, I couldn't understand how much time had passed. It was never clear if it was night or day because sometimes the guy in the lighthouse it was night, and when they went outside, it was day, or they'd be in the night and then it would be day. And one of the people who was there kept predicting they were going to have this horrible storm. And when I got to the end of the movie, I was like, what where what like where was the storm? I mean, there were so many plot holes in this movie that I feel like the six-headed shark could have fallen through them. But I feel like I don't want to like talk too much and like go through the whole movie. I definitely want to get your impression, Matt. And we were joking about this movie before we started recording. What is your take? What were your first thoughts upon watching this film, if we can call it that?
My first thoughts after finishing this film were wow. And not wow as in I'm impressed by the movie, but just wow, I'm impressed that this happened, I guess. I I was telling you before we started recording, I like this movie. I really do. It is pure and total insanity. And I like I guess I just sort of strapped myself in at the beginning and said, I'm just going to ride this roller coaster of absurdity. And I loved it. My very first note that I wrote was that I kind of like you mentioned, there are precursor films to this movie. The 2, 3, 4, 5 headed shark attack movies are at least somehow related. We I made the note that I was worried that jumping in with the latest of the franchise that I would be missing something. Yeah, even just the explanation for its existence or anything like that. But no, uh, I don't think I missed anything because the movie doesn't bother explaining the six-headed shark. It just is, and it's just there. And I loved that. They're like, you know what? We're not even going to bother with catching you up with the previous headed attack movies. Maybe this is the same shark. Maybe it's a different shark. It doesn't matter. We're about to watch a six-headed shark eat people for an hour and a half. And I enjoyed that. I did. Um, Not to say that it is by any means a perfect movie. Of course it's not. And that's what I think I enjoyed about it. Like you said, Mel, there were so many holes in the plot, and like you, I had made a note about the storm because it seems like it's going to be a major plot point because and we can dive into this more deeply once we get into it, but they're on this floating lab, which is basically just a pontoon boat, and that's why they leave it, is this threatening impending storm that never actually happens. Like it's a major motivator for them to leave the place that they thought was safe only for it to never happen. And I feel like that is a good overall summation of this movie. It is a whole lot of ideas that just kind of get thrown together into a pot. And there's a six-headed shark. I mean, the characters are mostly two-dimensional, would be generous to describe them as. I think one-dimensional is probably better in some cases. Like they really do seem to be just random stereotypes. The dialogue is weird and stilted, but funny, not intentionally usually, and it's just everybody is stereotypes. Like you literally have this is a marriage retreat, like you said, or I guess a couples retreat. It's never officially said, so I mean these could be people who are just in long-term relationships and are having problems. But you've literally got the hippie couple, you've got the wealthy guy and his wealthy pampered girlfriend, although the wealthy guy doesn't look wealthy, but apparently he is. You've got the nerdy couple. I mean, it's literally just going down the list of checking boxes of stereotypes. And I don't know. It shouldn't work. Like this movie, I should not have liked this movie as much as I did. And maybe I was just touching it, but yeah, that's my overall impression. Is it is stupid and awful, but I loved it.
Yeah, I mean, it was fun to watch. And I think this is another one of those movies where if you had like a group of people watching it, it would be just a fun movie to watch. I'm not even sure how to get into this. So, Matt, do you think that we should attempt to give an overarching plot to the whole movie, or just kind of do like we did with our discussion of Sharktopus and Whale Wolf and kind of talk about the weird episodes in it?
I mean, aside from the fact that this is a couples retreat, and like you've also pointed out, the main person leading the retreat is in the midst of a failing marriage. I mean, aside from that, it really is just sort of episodes of them seeing the shark, evading the shark, and trying to survive the shark attacks, and people getting picked off one or two at a time. So, I mean that's your plot right there. I mean, there are, I mean, there are more things that happen, but that's the movie. So yeah, I think maybe we should just kind of talk about some of the points, I guess, the plot points, if you will.
Yeah, I just I think that one of the things we need to talk about, one is that overarching the one attempt at an overarching plot other than the shark attacking people is the guy and his divorce. But they kind of have this like meeting, like they start to come back at the end. Like he's communicating with his ex-wife by radio as they're trying to figure out a way to, because when the storm comes, according to this woman who just magically becomes a meteorologist, she's talking about how the island is going to flood, so the shark will be able to get them anywhere they are on the island. And so they've got to go somewhere where they can get up high. And the guy who's been there all this time, Will, the guy who runs this camp, says, "Let's go to the lighthouse and go up the lighthouse steps." And they're like, "No, we need to go to this old lab, the lab where they, one of the conspiracy theories that the conspiracy theory hippie guy says is they created chihuahuas there, because they were doing work for the military or some such a thing. It flies by so fast, but it's kind of like a tip of the hat, I felt like, to like the sharktopus stuff. There always has to be some weird science or military conspiracy theory for the monster. And so they go there instead, and then they realize how stupid that was, and they try to get to the lighthouse. And like you said, as they go, their numbers are picked off by the shark. Um, and then while this is happening, the guy is like, their radios don't work or whatever. So when they get working radios, he communicates with his now ex-wife and her boyfriend, trying to get help from them. And I don't, I'm not trying to get to the end of the movie, but I thought that plot arc was interesting because they decide on the radios that they still love each other, and he like wants her to be able to get there to help them. Of course, we also have there's all these dangerous rocks around the island that cause people's boats to crash, so I guess the six-headed shark has something to eat. And this was like the weirdest and probably the most money of the special effects budget went into this. But as they're trying to get to the lighthouse to save the guy and the last two people that are left, and he's like so excited his wife is coming back to him, and I just kept, I don't know about you, Matt, but I really wanted her to live. And I was so sad when, so what happens is six-headed shark starts circling their boat and creates an impromptu whirlpool which sucks their boat to the bottom of the ocean. Seriously, listeners, that's what happens. I didn't just make that up. And the woman jumps off and manages somehow under her own power to swim out of the whirlpool. And I was like, she's gonna make it. She's gonna make it. Surely they're gonna give us like a kind of a happy ending. I figured the two people who survive are the people who are gonna survive, but you never know with these movies. They surprise you sometimes by not following exactly where you think they're going to go because they just have so many kind of weird holes in them. But yeah, she was eaten. And so I think we had probably the most emotional acting of the entire movie when was he was watching, somehow could see from so far away her being eaten by the shark. Matt, what did you think of the whirlpool effect? Because the shark definitely had multiple ways of killing people.
I like you like you said, like you had to pause when describing it to say that yes, this actually happened in the movie, to our listeners, so that they would not think that you were making this up. That was kind of my thought as I was watching this. Like, this is actually happening because much like Sharktopus, the six-headed shark seems to kind of fluctuate in its size. Sometimes it's fairly big, like, maybe the size of like two, three lions kind of side by side. And then other times it's much, much bigger. And in that point of the movie, it was bigger than the boat itself. And I saw it start swimming in a circle, and I just thought, I know where this is going, but is this really actually happening? And sure enough, it did. And yeah, it really, I think that that whole shot probably was a big chunk of their special effects budget, that and just the general Sharktopus itself. But like you, I was a little surprised that they killed the ex-wife. I Especially after they had the heartfelt sort of realization of their love for each other. I thought, okay, well, they're gonna get him back together with her, and then she got eaten, and I laughed, not like a haha that's funny, but just like a haha, like just kind of surprised laugh. But I actually wrote down in my notes while watching this that his acting in that scene was actually pretty good. I mean, it's not Oscar worthy, and maybe I was just numbed by the whole rest of the movie's acting, but he actually did a pretty good job of like showing his shock and sadness and everything, like all of those emotions. Like, he, he did a really good job. Like I said, it could have been just that by that point, since the movie was almost over, I had kind of dropped my threshold for what good acting would be. But I don't know. I like I said, I thought he did. I thought he did a good job in that scene. But yeah, it definitely kind of surprised me because, like you said, I thought the two of them would get together, would survive, I guess, since they had decided to get back together. So that was a nice twist that they make you think that she's going to survive and then she doesn't. That was I was impressed by that. Now I did want to mention, since we had kind of started talking about it in regards to the storm, this is something we had kind of talked about in passing before we started recording. But this lab, um, listeners, if you can, um, picture like a party barge, like a pontoon party barge that you would go out on a lake or river with friends. And then imagine that somebody has put like card tables with blood samples and a few other things and some tarp around across the top. And that's the lab. The reason why I'm describing it this way, so that you can kind of visualize it, is that, and this is a plot point, this is mentioned multiple times by different characters and is actually referenced in the prologue to the film, because we haven't mentioned this, but the film actually starts in the 1980s with this lab where the shark shows up and eats people. It's implied that the lab created the shark, but nothing's really said about that. So you don't really know what to do with the information. But flash forward to the main plot of the movie, and the hippie couple, the man in the relationship is, like you said, Mel, very, he's the conspiracy guy, and he talks about the dark web and this and that, and he's read all this stuff on the internet, and he knows all this information, and he even at the beginning of the movie says he wants to go check out that lab on the other side of the island. They then decide to go to this lab because it's on pontoons, or I don't remember if that's the word they use or not, but so it'll be able to float. But they keep repeating, it's been there for 40 years. It's been there for 40 years. This boat, when they get to it, it's literally, about the size of like my kitchen, which is not huge. It's this tiny boat that's not tethered to anything. It's free floating in the ocean on pontoons, and somehow these samples have survived the elements because there are not actual walls. It's just basically a tarp for 40 years. And it's just, it's so laughable and ludicrous. Like there's no other response to this except what? Because the second I saw it, I said, that's the lab? That what? I mean, it's, if you don't even watch this entire movie, just like watch it on Prime and fast forward to the scene where they get to the lab. It's about an hour or so into the movie, just so you could see what I'm talking about, because I can't describe it accurately, I don't think, for you to understand how asinine it is to even think that this thing survived 40 years, much less in the same spot. Does that sound right, Mel?
Yes, I I also was completely shocked when they got to the lab and it had survived for 40 years. Like you said, there's no explanation of what it's tied to. Maybe it has an anchor, I have no idea. In the beginning, in the 80s, they're literally just like going around in the ocean. And here the next, I have no idea. It doesn't make any sense. And yeah, I don't understand how it survived 40 years. I actually like laughed and laughed when the guy found the scientist journal that has been laying there on this desk for 40 years with this thing going around the waves. And yeah, none of the test tubes have fallen over. The book is still fine. He opens the book and they see the pictures of the six-headed shark. And so they're like, oh, they must have created it. Like they make a lot of inferences from very little information, but I guess they only have an hour and a half. But I was like, why isn't all that smeared beyond recognition? So yes, I had lots of questions about how this small little these three platforms, two or three platforms hitched together, not tied to anything, could last 40 years with everything still in the desks. Especially when we know from the prologue that in the past the six-headed shark attacked them. So you think that itself would have messed up their bookshelves, etc. So yeah, that was extremely difficult to believe. And then I liked, Matt, the way you described it as a party barge, because the beginning of the movie totally confused me, because I was not expecting, basically, from what I was expecting from watching, I think it was two-headed shark, from watching another multi-headed shark attack movie, which was basically kind of like co-eds partying and getting eaten. I just came into this not really knowing what the premise was of the people and what they were doing. And so I was like, wait a second. It was like 1980 something, like 1983 or 84, something about such and such biology, like marine biology lab. I was like surprised by what was being described and totally didn't understand where I was in time. And everybody's like drinking and dancing and playing music and partying. So I thought, oh, this must be like, college students partying on this, I guess, party barge in the ocean. And then there's some sort of fight going on between two of the people where the woman, like, I was so like kind of confused and not sure what was going on that I don't even remember what their fight was about. But she takes off her ring and throws it in the ocean, and he's like, that was like $100 something. And then she sees six-headed shark, and six-headed shark kills one of the people. He comes through the open part in the bottom, which I guess they use for diving. And so I'm just totally confused. And then all of a sudden it's like present day, and it's like, is this Survivor? No, it's a couples retreat for like working on your relationship or your marriage. So, listeners, the frame of this movie is so like jolting and confusing that that in itself almost creates another plot hole, because their gestures back at it are so flimsy that it's really hard to even make the connections I think they might have been trying to go for. But I think they were much more focused on the shark jumping out and killing people because that was the thing that they wanted to accomplish. But it would have been nice to have a little bit more explanation of, instead of the conspiracy theories, was there news about how all these people disappeared off this pontoon boat, or were somebody there? Oh, one more thing before you jump in, Matt. I also want to say the radio had been in a box out in the storms and stuff for 40 years, and it still worked and looked brand new. So, yes, I call shenanigans on the 40-year-old platform boat. That was a lab.
Yes, as do I. And one thing to add about the opening of the movie, because it really just feels like it was just sort of tacked on, like, hey, we need to add an extra 5 minutes to this movie for who knows why, because it really has no bearing on the plot in any way, shape, or form, except for the fact that it's on the same boat. I mean, it's on the quote unquote lab that that they discover later, that reveals nothing. Yes, this was where the six-headed shark was created. Full stop. I mean, it doesn't give them any information about how to fight it, how to kill it, how to survive. Its inclusion is meaningless, and the characters in it are meaningless because we don't. I mean, they're only in the movie for 5 minutes, and like you said, it's like this weird. And if I remember right, it even says in the title card that it's graduation week. So why are these people in the 80s graduating from wherever, high school, college, whatever, partying on a lab on a deserted island off the coast of Mexico? Like, it doesn't make any kind of sense. And then, like you said, the throwbacks to it, or callbacks to it, are haphazard and random, and really pretty much amount to the hippie guy talking about wanting to go explore and see the lab that he's read about on the internet, that was where there were scientific tests and where they invented the chihuahua. I mean, I don't know. It honestly felt like I said, they finished the movie, and edited it together and said it's too short. We need to add a little bit more time length to it for who knows why. Because there's no connection in that opening to anything or anyone in the rest of the movie.
Yes, I completely agree. I was muted, so you couldn't hear my laughter when you were questioning graduation weekend on a deserted island off the coast of Mexico. It does not make it does not make sense. I feel like it was either tacked on, like you said, or they just have this formula for these movies, and they're not even they're not even giving us the mad scientist anymore. It's just like, oh yeah, this was most likely created by people, let's watch it kill people. um I feel like maybe now we should talk a little bit about some of the attacks of the six-headed shark. So it begins, as most of these do, with, we see it attack one of these people who are possible scientists but maybe also partying students. And so we know that it exists. And then there's like two employees of Will, the guy that runs this island. And they're supposed to be setting up this, like, I think it's like a swimming race for the people to go and get food and drink and whatnot, and they can get champagne if they win the race or something to that effect. And they're setting it up, and they decide to go off and be by themselves until the people who are there for this retreat show up for that part. And they of course get eaten by the shark. And that is like a very Jaws-esque moment. They're on paddle boards, I think, and so they get pulled off the paddle boards. The paddle boards get turned over, so you don't necessarily see the shark coming out of the water and killing people like he does later there. I guess he or she, we don't know. um, and then I guess their first real encounter with it is Will, which I didn't understand this, but it seemed like to me that Will found the woman Rebecca's a part of her body with the wetsuit on it, and then of course they find the man's body because it bounces up in front of them when they're swimming to the smaller platform to get their food. And he still seems to think Rebecca's alive. And I liked Will as a protagonist. Everybody was always threatening to sue him. And yes, he did some bad things like fraud. He misadvertised his place as being in a different location and having a lot more amenities. Um, but I have to say, like, he cared about his employees to the point where he was like putting everybody in danger trying to save them when they were already dead. He tried to help all these people who were pretty hateful and threatening to sue him all the time. He went with the Crocodile Dundee wannabe to try to kill the shark. So, I liked him. And like you said, I really felt for him when he was emotional over the loss of his wife, which was, such a truly kind of horrifying situation since I wanted her to live. So he decides we have to find these people, we have to rescue them before we try to get away on the boat. Because they do have a boat at the beginning, which the people on the island who don't know how to run boats run aground through fear, basically, which they need a way to isolate themselves. So the Crocodile Dundee wannabe guy, which I think they even call him that, he decides that he is going to put together a spear with a flare on the end and blow it up. And they think at this point it's a regular shark. And so they walk out the water. And this is another thing with size, Matt. I couldn't figure out how they couldn't see it because they're in the shallows and somehow it was still swimming and underwater. And the water's only up to their waists or a little higher. And still the shark is completely covered. And he jams it into the shark's mouth, blows up the head, basically, blows a hole in the head. And they're like, yay, it's dead. And then they find out it has six heads. And this was the part that got me. We don't just see the six heads, we see one of the heads rip off the wounded head and throw it to the side. Because here's the thing, whoever created the shark enhanced its ability to regenerate. So they even have a throwaway comment that he may have had fewer heads at some point, but the more he gets hurt, the more he regenerates, which I don't know if that was supposed to be continuity with the other multi-headed sharks or if it was just something that somebody was yelling as they were running around the island. But I liked that moment as like a horror moment, but also kind of comic. I was not expecting it, and I was like, "Whoa, that's a whole new thing." I was like, "Are the heads fighting with each other?" Like it just came out of nowhere. So I thought that was an interesting technique. And then, of course, that guy's killed. But yeah, that surprised me at that moment when that happened.
I agree. I was not expecting that to happen at all. And I had a pretty much the same reaction of surprise, a little bit of shock, and also loving it. Because I mean, yeah, it does have this like slight comedic effect, but it is also pretty gruesome because I mean, it's got the gore. I mean, it's CGI and very obviously CGI, but it does have the gore of it. And there's even a callback to it at the end, which I actually kind of clapped for when they're trying to lure the six-headed shark over some tanks of, I think it was acetylene, and one of the survivors, the husband of Mary, one of the two people that actually fully survives, he's up on top of the lighthouse and he's going to shoot them and blow up the shark. And one of its heads gets injured, so it rips it off and throws the head up onto the lighthouse and crushes him with it. And I just started cackling. Like, I'm laughing right now because it
Yes,
was
that
so
was
absurd.
amazing. I loved it. That was amazing. That
I
might
mean,
have been
it's
the best
just,
part of the whole movie. It was a perfect shot too. The shark just threw it right
yes,
there. And he was a horrible
yes. And
person.
he was. Yeah, he was obnoxious. So he was definitely one of those people whose death you kind of cheer for. But yeah, like, um it's stuff like that I was all in on with this movie. Like, when it comes out of the water, and much like Sharktopus, somehow it can survive outside of the water for extended periods of time while it makes its attacks. Also not explained. I'm assuming it has to do with its genetic enhancement that gave it its regenerative abilities and excess heads. But like, the two front-ish heads are kind of the main heads, and the other four, which are kind of run parallel along the side of the body, are using their snouts to walk like legs. And that was the exact moment where I went all in on this movie and said, I love it. Because it is so gloriously dumb and absurd that it doesn't even give you time to question it. Like, you look at it and go, wait, is that using its heads like legs to what? And then it just runs with it and just kind of barrels you over with its absurdity. And yeah, I think that was kind of my favorite moment of the movie when I first saw that and went, this is so dumb and I love it.
Yes, that was also just amazing. I have to say, I feel sorry for the sharks on the side who are using their noses as feet. It looked kind of painful. Um, I was actually just looking through my notes, and that part where you see it walking on the heads when it attacks I think it was the nerdy couple who had actually worked through their problems. Everything worked. The counseling worked, I guess, and I didn't understand it because their conversation starts out with them just talking about how they're going to split up and it's over, and then they all of a sudden are talking about how they're going to be together, and then they get attacked. But there was this one part, I think it was like right after that. It's hard to tell because the movie's so episodic, but Will, the leader of everything, he is still on the pontoon boats, if I remember, because he's waiting for his ex wife to contact him so he can tell her that they're headed to the lighthouse. I think that's what's going on. I may be creating meaning where there is none, but I think that was what was going on. And the shark has killed the one couple that I was mentioning who are like not together but then are, and is coming after the three people at the time. So Duke, the guy who thinks he's like Crocodile Dundee, his wife, who kind of lost the will to live after she lost him, and the crazy guy who's jealous of his wife and Will. And they're about to get killed, and Will like comes out of nowhere and he has this long serrated blade. I'm not sure what it was supposed to have come off of, and he just chops one of the heads off. And I don't, that may not be the first time we see a head regenerate. I can't remember now, but he chops one of the heads off, so it has to pull the head off. And I'm like, why? He doesn't, he just hits the nose of another one. He doesn't try to chop off any more heads. And then when the shark turns around to retreat and regroup because he caused them damage, he throws the bloody saw blade down in the sand and runs away. And I was like, why? Like, they found a weapon that they could use to perhaps protect themselves, and he just ditches it. And I felt like that was purely just because they didn't want them to have any weapons at the end other than what they found at the lighthouse. Because if it was me, which I wouldn't even be in this situation, I probably would have been the first to die if I was. But I would not have been like, oh, I was just able to use this to hurt the monster. I'm just gonna leave it in the sand behind me. So I did not understand that particular plot choice, though it made for an interesting scene when he bursts in all of a sudden and, takes off one of the heads of the shark.
Yeah, I agree. That did feel like sort of a contrived way to keep the movie going a bit longer. Just here's a weapon that they can use, but we can't really use it yet, so we'll just have him throw it down or something like that. It felt weird and almost kind of awkward, I guess. But yeah, I agree with that.
Yeah, Matt, I feel like it was purely like a plot moment. Like, we need them to use these other weapons they find at the lighthouse. That was an interesting scene. It was cool. We don't need this anymore. I also wondered if it was, again, another plot point because the one husband, I cannot remember his name off the top of my head, but he is jealous of Will because he thinks Will and his wife are getting together, which they actually aren't. Will does want his wife to come back, but then at the end they are together. But yeah, there's that power imbalance moment for a bit in the lighthouse when the jealous husband finds a gun and Will has to take the ammunition so he doesn't get killed. And so I wondered if maybe they felt like having him have the blade would have changed how they wanted the movie to end. I don't know. I'm trying to come up with reasons at this point, but I feel like, listeners, we need to tell you about the end of this movie because we talked about when we watched Jaws, well, and Sharktopus, and even Sharks of the Corn, that all of these movies seem to want to have a big explosion at the end. And so you probably already noticed from Matt talking earlier about they tried at one point to bury these tanks, these flammable tanks under the sand, but jealous husband dude kept trying to kill them and not shoot the tanks, so that plan didn't work. And then of course the shark takes him out by throwing his head at him. So at the end of the movie it became very hard to follow because I think they swim back to the boat, or the boat's gotten closer, the boat that ran aground. Will and Mary go to the boat. Will goes down below to see how bad the damage is to the hull, if it's seaworthy. Mary, meanwhile, is stringing together a bunch of tanks so that they can use them to kill the shark, to blow the shark up. And basically, Will tells her it's seaworthy. All they have to do is lure the shark to them somehow, get the tanks near it, and blow it up, and then they could use the boat to go elsewhere. And then all of a sudden, and they also create a spear. All of a sudden, I guess because the shark starts hitting the boat to try to turn it over, they change the plan on the fly, and basically he's down in the hull trying to stab the shark through the hull, which I felt like was making a lot of damage, which would make it very difficult for them to float away. Somehow, in all of it, I don't know if it was like my TV or what, but it was very dark and kind of hard to tell what was going on. Somehow, in all of it, the tanks do get attached to the shark. I guess they tied it onto it somehow, or maybe it was tied on the spear. And then they swim away. The shark comes after them. Will gets injured somehow. And at the end of the movie, they lure it onto the island. It's running on the island. And even though the tanks were behind the six-headed shark, somehow Will is able, after fumbling with the flare a whole bunch dramatically, to get it in there and shoot the tanks and blow the shark up, which, of course, there's all this gore because the shark is blown up. And then at the end, it's, implied pretty strongly that Mary, since she's a lawyer, is going to protect him from legal recourse from families of the other people, and that they're going to be together now. And so you have kind of I guess you have the love interest checked because the ex-wife died and Mary's left at the end. You have the serial killer slasher type aspect of the shark killing people a couple at a time until the last couple people who get out. and you have the explosion that you need at the end of like a summer shark movie. Still, the storm had not shown up, so I'm not sure what was going on with that because it's sunny at that point. But yeah, we don't see them get picked up or anything. I don't remember that, but we do have kind of a happy ending at the end. It's preposterous and extremely dramatic and difficult to believe, but it happened. So I don't know. I don't think there are any more. Like, I don't think there's a seven-headed shark movie out there. I'm going to look it up to see after this, but I'm guessing that is the end. I'm not sure what else you could do with it at this point. But that is the horror of the six-headed shark attack. So listeners, if you like bad movies that are so bad they're kind of good, and they're gonna make you laugh, but in a good way because you're laughing because it's funny, not because it's completely unbelievable or uncomfortable. I recommend that you check out, Six-Headed Shark Attack. It's an interesting movie, and I enjoyed watching it. I could see myself watching it again someday if I was with like a group of people who hadn't seen it and wanted to watch it and make fun of it. So I guess with that, since we've talked about the end and the demise of Six-Headed Shark, we'll end this week's episode. So listeners, we're at No Fear Cast on Twitter and Instagram, and we have a Facebook page. Our email is nofearcast@gmail.com. If you're enjoying our Summer of Sharks and you have seen and enjoy any of these movies, or you have movies you want to suggest to us, feel free to reach out to us on social media or through our email. We love to hear from folks, and we hope you're enjoying this summer theme. If you are enjoying what we do, you might consider supporting us on Patreon, where you can get access to exclusive content with mini episodes on the weeks between the releases of our main episodes. Or if you're not able to financially support us at this point, you can rate and review us in Apple Podcasts, which helps other listeners find us, and it's entirely free. You could pass on the word to your friends and family who you think may enjoy this podcast as well. Our theme music is by Nicholas Gasparini. Thank you so much for listening, and we will be back in 2 weeks with a brand new episode.